speak, I feel.
Garia, is there something to learn? A brief introduction was Professor Balal. He did his PhD from IIT Kanpur and his research is...
Some of you might have heard about this because there is a certain obsession that I've been having. And because Sushil Mishra insisted that I speak, and I said I will not speak on things that our scholars will present anyway. So I just want to spend some time discussing this interesting aspect of our research that we did a few years ago. We were studying this iron-making practice of the Agariyas. The Agariyas are the tribe whose profession is to smelt iron. They are not Loha who do smithy. They smelt iron from iron ore to iron. And there are still a few who are practicing this at the limits at the time that we made this work about 10 years ago. I don't know whether they have still been able to survive or not. Of course, it was a long search before we could find some practicing one to make it for a living as against ceremony. Yeah. So, what I'm going to speak on is a few aspects which has challenged our intellect. In the sense, how do we understand? Why do they do the kind of things they do? Very often their myths or their practices and their beliefs are dismissed as being obscuranity. There is something to learn. Yes, the next slide. What I will do is, I'll go through a few slides throwing up these challenges. This is the kind of furnace that they use. It's about, that height. This is from a place called Sela, which is in Jharkhand, border in the district of Jashpur. It's a place called Sela. And you see the kind of, this is an upright furnace, which is probably about 700 to 800 millimeters high above the ground, and 150 to 200 kilometers. Go to the next one. This is about another maybe 50 kilometers east of that place, in a place called Bishun. You see this furnace. There is one more slide. This furnace is slightly inclined. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, this is our furnace. Actually, if you see these ropes, this has been tied behind to make sure that this doesn't fall down. This again, the height is of that kind, about 720 meters. From the next slide, this is the furnace now almost 200 kilometers west in a place called Wadranagar, which is bordering UP. No, actually, it's not UP, Mirzapur. Mirzapur will be UP, but in Chhattisgarh right now. And this furnace is much smaller. This is about 6 millimeters, about 150 millimeters shorter. Actually, this is the furnace. Those of you who were here in 92, 93 when we had a congress, this furnace was set up in IIT Bombay for the this thing as such. The furnace is smaller, and there are many other distinct. If you go to the next slide, yeah, this I had a transparency. I couldn't find it. This is from Orissa, right southeast of where we're located across the border. You see this has a very slim kind of furnace. Height is again about 750 mm. It's a slim kind of furnace, and they have some other arrangements here. Okay, the next one. Of course, this is what we built in IIT Bombay. I'm sure you can recognize these people. They're much younger. Yeah. This is the first slide I showed near Jashpur. This is about 15 kilometers away from there, in a place called Ghatta. This is the furnace. Because right now he is doing smithy. He's doing smithy. You observe this man. This is an old man. This was his grandson. You see, this is again 750. Back to 750. Go to the next slide. Actually, that young fellow who was there is here, and this is an entire. They own another furnace. This is a dugout furnace. It's underground altogether, and it's an entirely different kind of furnace. The next one will probably show. This is how it's operated. It's a dugout furnace, and the furnace is basically is just excavated into the ground, and they make this working area under. So please also note that this working is going on at night. Okay, we will come back to that later. So you see that there is a variety of these furnaces, and same place with they have two different kinds of and the same place. So this is always bothered. Of course, if you look up literature, there are other kinds of furnaces which have recorded. For example, you go to Malabar, there are furnaces which is probably about 20 to 30 times larger than this, though the height doesn't vary. So when we try to investigate why this is the case, we'll come back to some of the chemistry later on. They actually make furnaces according to the ores that they have, and their ore selection is extremely interesting. What we consider a very high grade ore will be rejected by it. They will very often go to ores which are slightly higher in gain and content, which goes with their technology. We'll see later on, primarily because they have a limitation on the temperature that they can achieve. We'll come back to the adiabatic flame temperature that they achieve. They have. So, and the whole process works on the basis of ability to form a liquid slag. The liquid slag is not formed. We'll again see a slide later that their product will not be consolidated into let's say a powder. It's different. So you see that there is a genius as to for each kind of ore they have developed it. They have developed a furnace of its own. For example, if you see normally, of course, they are mined from the surface, but one of the funny things that we found next slide is that they take their iron ore from the river bed. These are magnetic sand which gets washed down, and actually he is doing a gravity separation here. He just puts it on a slope and puts water, so the sand will come down. The magnetite which is heavier will stay at the top. He is doing a gravity separation, just like our Wilfley table kind of or spiral kind of gravity separation. That's what he is doing here. And this magnetic ore actually, though it is fine, he uses a tall furnace. Whereas if it is a ore with a high ganglion, he uses a very small furnace. And there's a whole chemistry involved. If he can produce the slag at a low temperature, he would like to have a low furnace because he doesn't want once a reduction has taken place, he does not want the iron to stay in the reactive zone anymore, because then it will become sulfur and silicon, manganese, etc., which is very often done. So this is one aspect, the variety of furnaces, and there seems to be we have not found out the logic for each one of them, but there seems to be a logic related to the kind of ore that he uses. The next slide. Yeah, this is the other one which was very exciting for us. These furnaces are operated all this in this whole Agaria belt. The Agaria belt where it goes from about Hoshangabad near Bhopal east into almost into Bengal border. Okay, it's a large belt. A large number of tribes. They are all classified according to anthropology into a single tribe called the Agarians. Though they have different names, Asuf, Jogras, and so on. They are operated by these foot-operated bellows, and this is very specific. Actually, it's so specific that the foot-operated bellow tribes will not intermarry with the hand-operated bellow. That is how their technology is preserved in certain sense. There are their practices. We have to realize that in most of these, when the technology is practiced by a particular caste or a tribe, the whole technology is built up around their myths and beliefs, okay? And that is how the technology is transferred, etc. So these heat alternate blows on this, and this is very hard work. These are inspiration kind of tours. The next slide will show a detail of this. These are the tours. They have this bamboo pole, the ball, and through this thing will come out. So when we have gone to say this, obviously very hard work. So people used to advise They found that hand-operated blowers gave them problems. They were not getting good iron within the constraints, of course. These are not that they have put so much of input. But because in many places we found that the agraria themselves have adopted that blower for their smithing. Whereas for this, they continue to do that. Next. So this gives a section of the tool of these bellows. They have interesting way of operating over that. Yeah, the next one. So this pulsating kind of pressure, whether it has an advantage, whether if you bellows basically give a flow which is pulsating, as against a continuous flow which will be given by flow. So we did some small modeling exercise to see in a bore what happens to mass transfer if you do a pressure pulsation, and you can see what happens. This is with static pressure, static flow. That's continuous flow if you have, and if you do pulsations with various frequencies and various amplitudes, you can see the enhancement that you can get in the mass transfer. So there is a logic in this, and we extended this. The next one is a back transparency. So we use this in line calcination in a static packed bed, and packed bed suction we were weighing using a solenoid valve, and the calcination for a given set of conditions, amount of coprese, etc. It is basically a static bed in which you have a suction. You light it at the top. This is our laboratory unit. You see, with the continuous flow, this is the kind of conversion we got for the kind of coprese that were added from 8 or 9% coprese. And you do enhancement, you see the percent association with ingredients. To various kinds of frequencies, 0.33 hertz, 0.75 hertz. So see that there is a logic in this use of this. So this has become our research area. We are looking for a research model building now. Heat transfer and mass transfer condition under pulsating flow. The next transfer. So that is as far as the other one. There is this great myth. If you read the literature in the 18th, 19th century, agarias are classified as one of the laziest of the tribes. Primarily because whenever some enumerator went to the tribal village, in every tribal village there will be 2-3 agarias because they serve the purpose of providing all the equipment. They will be sleeping in the day. And then when you actually ask them as to why they do this, they say we work at the night. And if you go to an agaria hutment during the night, they will start working around 10 or 11 o'clock in the night or 12 o'clock in the night and work till 7 in the morning. And you ask them why you do this, they say they have a myth. And the myth is that the sun god is their enemy. Okay? And that's the large myth in this. So if the sun sees their production, then they would not get their life. So they finish their operation by about 7 o'clock. And that's why obviously if you see them working in the night, actually it's one of those very hard working people. But in the daytime obviously they are sleeping after the 6 hours. It's like a 6-hour marathon. Working on those bellows. If you some of us, me and my students, didn't last more than 5 minutes on the bellows. 5 minutes you are out of breath. Okay. Now what is the reason? Okay, we were wondering. Of course, they are all dismissed as myths. But actually, when we did some simple adiabatic flame temperature calculation in front of it. Okay, so on a daytime when the temperature may be about 30 degrees, this is what you would get. Adiabatic flame temperature 15 30 hours, depending on the day. If you have morning, it may be 20 degrees. So you will be about 20 degrees lower. So morning temperature will be low. But if you take that along with the moisture content which is there in the air and do the adiabatic flame temperature calculations, and if you plot with respect to the partial pressure of H2O, for example, that there is a sharp drop in the temperature. So it makes sense early in the morning to finish the heat when the dew has fallen and the atmosphere has lost its moisture. Then though the 20 degrees Celsius, but your humidity would have fallen so much that you climb up here. You know, you get 30 degrees Celsius at 20, this may be about 60 relative humidity. It's much worse than 20 degrees Celsius with some 25% humidity or the next. So they do get much better operation early in the morning before the day comes in, and again the moisture will evaporate back from the dew. This can be similar. Yeah, this is the same thing plotted with the relative humidity. This is also, of course, the clue. This is the clue that we got is one of those times he said winter working is better than summer working. That gave us the clue that this must be there. Okay? Because the winter temperatures are lower, but it's very dry climate. Yeah, the next one. There is a lot of myth around and very strict, rigid taboos around making of these tools. The furnace is made quite the furnace. The making of the tool is quite rigid, and there are various varieties. Different furnaces have different clays selected, and it's usually the woman's job to make this tool. It's also called the nari. And you see that the operation depends on how well this tool which started off with melts off by the end. By the end, if it has come about half the size, then his working has gone well. If it does not melt, then he has a problem. He would not have a bloom at all. If it has melted too early, then he doesn't have a bloom either. Okay? So there is a great amount of practice rigidity in making this, and we found that when we did this operation here, we couldn't do this because we didn't know what was the so we had a nice aluminum tube which we used to slowly withdraw to simulate the burning of the tool. Yeah, the next one. Yeah, this is our experiment. I showed you the adiabatic flame temperature. We did our experiments here, and we find that you see this is the temperature normally you get. You slightly increase the humidity, it drops down like this. This we did with a 2-color pyrometer through the tool. We measured the same temperature in front of the tool. Yeah, the next one. This is still an unexplored. We have not been able to explain it. See, this is how they make the charcoal. The next slide will show. The next one. Yeah, if you observe this carefully, this is actually green wood. Nobody would make charcoal out of green wood. You dry it first, and then you would make charcoal. But these people insist that for smelting, you need the green wood charcoal. And we try to characterize in terms of their petrology, in terms of their composition. We have still not found what the reason is. Okay. They of course have another taboo that for the smelting they need hard wood. They would like to have charcoal from teak. So teak will not get, so they go for sal. That is why all these areas are spread in the place where sal grows. Okay? Sal tree is a hardwood tree. The softwood tree it grows very, very fast. They don't accept. They use it in the stick, but they don't use it in smelting. We have still not understood. There is something to do with the reactivity and something to do with the ash content, which is different in the fast and the slow growing trees. For one thing that we know is the ash content is always higher in fast growing trees, whereas in slow growing trees the ash content is lower. We are not very sure. Okay. The last point I would like to talk about is about once that is made, then they will open the temporary door, take the bloom out, and this is what they get out. And they get a lump of iron like this. This is taken and this has to be forged. This has to be forged. Now, if the process has gone on right, and there was good slagging, actually during the process, there's a process of slagging. If the slagging has been dry, and he can consolidate into a nice piece and convert it into this thing as such, some hollow, plowshare. But otherwise, if that has not been dry, if not formed the slag properly, this will simply break into pieces. The first hammer blow, and it used to break into pieces. And most of the time in IIT Bombay, this is what used to happen. We have barely been able to get the good blooms. Yeah. Now, we also did at IIT Bombay. We did a temperature profiling of the whole furnace. And you can see that this is where a course is 1400 degrees will come, but very very quickly it will fall down. And it's about 1100 degrees here. 1200 degrees probably is somewhere in this, and that is where the bloom will sit. And this bloom sits on a crucible made from solidified slag. So the slag has to flow down and melt somewhere here, and then as it cools down, it forms a crucible, and then on that crucible the bloom has to sit. Otherwise, even that iron that is formed will be scattered all over the place, and you will not get a single. So the slag, this thing is extremely important. The temperature of the slag is extremely important. That's why I was telling you, and the temperature of flowing. Yeah, the next one. And very very often again when we went there, a lot of meteorologists had come, and they were suggesting that why are they not using the flux? Yeah. And this was a wonder as to why they don't use flux. In all other metal operations they use flux, and flux is known. And these places are rich in lime, and lime is known to be a flux. And then you find if you look at their slag regime, as I told you, the whole furnace operation is depending on the slag. They are somewhere here. That is around 1150. This is the temperature that is where the bloom sits. Now, if they add CaO, this is not there. This is CaO, this is FeO, this is SiO2. So, if you move along this line, you see that for some distance, usually the ash will give them 5 to 6% CaO as heat from the ash. Beyond that, if you go, you see that the temperatures very quickly. If they add lime, they will be in trouble. The furnace will be in trouble because the slag will not be fusion. Yeah, the next slide. And they have a very interesting way of classifying their ores. Any ore which contains alumina is rejected or is degraded, and you can very clearly see what happens. You go into alumina in this is FeO now SiO2, and if you go into this corner, the temperature with a small amount of alumina, you see the temperature quickly increases, melting down. So obviously, and they know this, and they give it a different name. Those naming itself is a very interesting. There are black, greenish, this, that, etc. Male, female, various ways of classification. Yeah, that's what I wanted. This is what the product is. This is the one which is most famous. But the next one is this is actually a much larger pillar which was there in Dhar. Fallen down 52 feet high. Now it's in 3 pieces, so the archaeology department is like this, and there is an obscure place in Karnataka, the next one, where there is a thing, there is a worship piece. It's a very thin iron rod like this, almost 32 to 35 feet long. Yeah, it's the same one. So I just wanted to say that the learning opportunities exist elsewhere, everywhere. Wherever you look, there are